The United Nations 73rd General Assembly is underway with world leaders discussing the most pressing issues of our time. Civil society is key to good governance, and the human rights organization Amnesty International is one of the main players. Today I'm joined by its Secretary General Kumi Naidoo. I'm Ediz Tiyansan, and this is One-on-One Express. Do you think this year's session has the right focus? Do you think the priorities of Amnesty International are adequately represented in this year's session?
Oddly so. Firstly, we should be focusing on what is happening in Syria, what's happening in Yemen, what's happening in South Sudan, which are effectively bloodbaths that are happening where civilians are dying in large numbers, many of whom are women and children, who are absolutely innocent, victims of what often seems to be superpower kind of conflicts which go beyond just the internal conflicts in those countries.
Should this event, the fact that 194 heads of state are gathering here to give some attention to their plight, should this give them a glimpse of hope?
I think that most people, if they were able to see what is happening, let's be honest, most of those people in those conflict zones by now don't really have access even to know what is happening here, given telecommunications and so on has been destroyed. I don't think when they look here they're going to see any sense of hope, and they would be correct not to feel a sense of hope, because let's be blunt about it. The most powerful countries in the world sitting in the permanent members of the Security Council have to carry a huge amount of the blame. They have been pathetically negligent in the fact that they have basically been using vetoes and threatening to use vetoes to prevent us from moving forward. And I would say that the failure to act in the interest of the people of Syria, Yemen, South Sudan and the Rohingya is probably a very big wake-up call that the Security Council urgently needs to be reformed.
So how can we fix this? I mean, what kind of reforms the UN can take to make the Security Council more democratic?
Well, the first thing we should say is that this governance system of the United Nations is set in a very different moment. It's out of touch with reality. As Kofi Annan used to say, it is set in the geopolitics of 1945. It reflects a reality of 1945. So, for example, Britain and France, why should they even have a veto? They are small population size. In 1945, they were colonial hegemons controlling large numbers of the world's population, right? And then if we say, well, okay, they are all holders of weapons of mass destruction, nuclear weapons, then of course, then Pakistan, India, Israel, and so on should also be added to the Security Council. So there's no rhyme or reason to the composition in today's political reality. We have to rethink the composition of the Security Council. I think we should do away with the idea of the veto altogether, and I think that's what would make the United Nations a much more fairer. They basically protect their allies. You know, you look at the way the United States will veto anything to do with Israel, or how China will veto anything to do with, say, Myanmar. It's wrong.
How would you put it to the ordinary audience, explaining the kind of toll this takes on the populations, the suffering populations on the ground? To
ordinary people, the United Nations is the only hope. If you go speak to people on the ground in Syria or in or the Rohingya or the people in Yemen, they hope. Today we have regional blocs, right? We have the European Union, we have the African Union, we have Mercosur in Latin America, we have CARICOM for the Caribbean countries. Maybe a more fairer way is to have a Security Council that is based on regional blocks of countries, so that in fact it's not to say that there are not options. If there's political will, and if people want to build, if governments want to build a United Nations that can really protect people, really prevent war and conflict, to really stop the bloodshed, it can be done. The question is political will, and whether those that have the power right now will be willing to give it up in the interest of humanity more broadly and more fairly and with a more global mindset.
Kumi Naidoo, Secretary General of Amnesty International, thank you very much for joining us.